Hello, everybody, and welcome to Readers of the Lost Art, the eternal, never-ending Proust session with I've forgotten the word for it, the French word for gimp. Le boiseux, was it?
Les boiseux de la
Right.
donjon.
Et aujourd'hui, ici, le mangeur de madeleine, n'est-ce pas? Vraiment?
Es lo mismo. No
Voilà, vive la France.
No hablo francés, soy español.
Dos termitas, por favor.
Sí, pero una clarificación, señor bloqueador. Hoy mi nombre esto es en francés porque el biblio de hoy.
Sorry, everyone. You think you've stumbled into we haven't been drinking. I've had two very strong coffees.
I'm on some tea.
Yeah, and there's no vodka in that, is there, Stuart?
There's not. No, sadly not.
Right. Well, I'm actually in a good mood, which is unusual for me.
That's a change.
Yeah, because I was having my mind was slightly fuzzy thinking about, I've never worked so bloody hard, doing my channel. I never worked this hard when I was actually working.
Didn't you get 2 videos out this week?
Anyway, I've been thinking about Turner videos, and it relates to this Proust because we probably won't get there today, but there's a section where he talks about the church in Combray, and my mind was a bit busy with all these other thoughts, and it was such a long, pointless, tangential, deviation from any notions of efficiency. Proust is just writing for the sake of writing, and I lost myself in it. And it's like I've never been on Valium except once before an operation, but it felt like taking a Valium. It was amazing, and it just made me think of, it's an obvious point to make, but we live in such efficiency-driven, target-driven times. And for those people who are struggling with the first bit, Combray 1, and thinking, what is the point of this? Where is it going? Why does he take so long to say anything? I've said to people in the past, you just need to let it wash over you and not look for a point. And I think Adorno, just to be pretentious for a second, pretentious, moi? But didn't Adorno say, he said good art was like purposiveness without purpose, as opposed to... Or is it the opposite way around? I always get confused.
No, I think so. I mean, I've been reading quite a lot of Schopenhauer in preparation for next week, and I think Schopenhauer basically says a lot of similar things. The antithesis of the will is just kind of slow, deliberative art, and I think Adorno picked up that as well. Definitely Horkheimer as well.
Yeah, can we tell people about that? Yeah, for people, just because the channel may be taken down after next Friday, because we're going to do a session on
the end is near.
Schopenhauer's essay on women, which in this day and age is probably grounds for being removed from YouTube.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I don't know. There's worse things on YouTube. I think if we approach it in a systematic, balanced way, there's no issues.
Yeah, that's the problem, Stuart. That's the problem with me. The minute you get onto certain issues, I'll end up getting divorced. B,
well, if you haven't been divorced by now, I think she's a keeper.
Well, that's only because she's locked in the basement as we speak. If you hear any rattling noises,
it's just Paul's missus. Do you have to let her out to go to work then? I want to know how this arrangement works.
Working from home came at a really good time for me because she could still earn, and I never let her out the house. So
and just put a computer in the basement.
Yeah, in the comments, JNT saying there is more than one person watching JNT, but he's saying we're closing in on the goal of you and I just talking to each other at the very end. To achieve that, actually, didn't we say one of us needs to fall out with the other one? So it's only one of us talking. You need to hack onto my site when we fall out, and you can present on your own, and that's how it's going to end.
I think that's what it's going to end. I was just presuming it was just going to end as like a webcam with some, burnt out post-apocalyptic background, and that would probably happen in about 200 or 300 years, and we still won't have made it past book 1.
we will now talk about the text, but Jay said he's in Jay is the name and he's in Texas. But let me get this straight. That must be about 5 a.m. because Texas, is 7-8 hours behind us.
So was he? Yeah, I would say about 8 hours. It's probably the guys do shift work or just one of our insomniac fans.
No, I think he's wet the bed. 7 a.m.
7 a.m. No,
I'd get adult diapers, Jay. That's not good. If you were, I only ever been up at 7 a.m. if I've wet the bed.
Really?
It must have been a late night.
So
no, I'm not having it, Jay. He's claiming he's an early bird. No. You've got incontinence issues, I'm sure about it. Anyway, now we've offended our only one viewer. Sorry.
I was going to say, I saw a video about a restaurant where they give deliberately bad service. This is like a YouTube channel where you deliberately insult the viewers.
I apologise, Jay. I hope
like
he's Texas with a sense of humour, hopefully.
How did that come up?
Right. Oh, I pressed on it, right.
Share Jay's incontinence with the world. Oh, that's terrible.
Right, can you bring up before this gets worse?
Swiftly moving on.
Yeah, could we go to...
I just remember I think we left it off 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Le Champi, Francois le Champi, is that right?
Francois le Champi, yeah. So we talked about Granny's pictures on the wall and her buying books, and we got onto Champi.
Because what I'd like to talk about is just after that, the bit where it says, "My dear," she said to Mama, "I could not allow myself to give the child anything that was not well written."
There's some more. I think we got to that.
Yeah, there it goes. The next paragraph. The truth was that she could never permit herself.
Yeah, permit.
I'm going to sack the operator. Could you just scroll down? Sclerotic tortoise.
Slow.
And now this is, you said, I can't insult this. I'm in a bind now. I can't insult Jay in Texas and read the print's too small. So I'm going to squint and not be able to read so I can keep insulting Jay, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Right, but what I wanted to do now was, if I don't want to go on a little monologue, I will. That's what actually I'm going to do. But could I preface it by saying, since some of the theory I'm going to talk about you're very well familiar with, will you either chip in or when I've finished monologuing, tell me why I'm completely deluded and wrong?
Sounds good.
Because for people who aren't familiar with the theory, this I find this section interesting that's coming up, where the truth was she could never allow herself to purchase anything from which no intellectual profit was be derived. And then she goes on. She's got this thing. It's one of the quirks that Proust talks about. Everyone in his family has some vaguely amusing personal, what's the word, idiosyncrasy.
Yeah, quirks, idiosyncrasy.
Yeah. So she she likes to give them antiques, as though their long desuetude had effaced from them any semblance of utility and fitted them rather to instruct us in the lives of the men of other days than to serve the common requirements of our own. And I'll talk about it as it goes on, but what all this reminded me of was that the grandmother who he seems to admire the most and who seems to contain the most good qualities in the whole family, she's like the yardstick of morality, how to judge everyone.
Yeah.
She, for me, represents this basically the last person, this section about antiques and wanting to give him real art rather than even photographs. You, like me, are familiar with, there's a essay by a famous cultural theorist, and in a way he's a great cultural theorist, Walter Benjamin. But in another way, he annoys me slightly because he's a bit like James Dean, because he died early. There's a certain type of trendy, lefty cultural theorist who absolutely adores him. Sometimes out of all proportion to his actual... He never actually produced that much because he died early.
Yeah, you can get T-shirts with him on. He's got that like bohemian kind of,
Che Guevara. He's Che Guevara, James Dean of cultural theory. So I'm slightly biased against him for that reason. It's not his fault. But Walter Benjamin wrote this paper, I think, was it 1935? The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And it's interesting because this is, I'm guessing, this is about 10 to 15 years he was writing this before Benjamin wrote his essay.
Yeah.
And what people who aren't familiar with the philosophy of technology in that type of area, there's relatively few people have ever written about the negative consequences of technology, about what I call, or what is called, technological determinism, the idea that I call it the banana-rama theory of technology. People tend to say it's not what you've got, it's the way that you use it, and that's what gets results. So they're saying it's not the technology, it's how you use it. And I was once at a talk in Edinburgh, and this very famous French guy, Bruno Latour, this point was made to him. And he went like that, he made a gun, so I get my fingers. He went like that to the audience and said, bang, bang, but why are you not dead? Making the point that, you know, to shoot someone, you actually need the weapon. And Walter Benjamin's essay is one of the few that actually, Heidegger is another one, the question concerning technology. But I don't know about you, there are other people, Langdon Winner, Lewis Mumford, I'm going to talk about on the channel.
Yeah,
in the
Albert
near future.
Borgman as well.
Yeah.
I mean, even this Byung-Chul Han guy, the one we've been talking about lately, he's kind of the latest iteration.
Jean Baudrillard. There are people, but I'm just saying, in the wealth, you know, the forests that have been destroyed in order to write about technology, the people, philosophically speaking, who've actually critiqued technology, it's not a huge number. And one of the most famous essays, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, it's not meant to be critical. I think it is if you read it a certain way, but what Benjamin's trying to argue is, and it's all relevant to this and the grandmother, and later on the description of the church in Combray. So it is relevant, people. Please don't get put off with this long ramble. But the essay talks about the concept of aura, and aura is defined by Benjamin as a unique point in space and time. So he gives the example of, he said, if on a summer's day the wind is rustling through the branches, only you at that unique point in space and time can appreciate the aura of that moment. And what in this, I think the grandmother in this section, what she's put off by are these increased reproductions that are invading the culture. So she's trying to get her grandson, A, to read, and B, to appreciate art in its original form. And then at the end of this section, in the next section, Combray 2, there's a long description about the church in Combray, which I would argue is all about aura. It's all about the uniqueness of a particular point in space and time. And in the times we're living in now, A, there's no cultural memory because history is being cancelled. B, there's no continuity because no one goes to church or anything like that. C, I'm going to go through the alphabet now. C, there is the screen culture we inhabit has no aura because everything's reproduced, everything's, you know, digitalized. So all of these factors, I really do think the grandmother in this section represents, and so does Proust as the writer. They represent, you know, the last vestiges of a society before it was taken over by this reproduction of initially photography, but then digital technology.
Yeah, no, fair play, Paul. It's a good point. It's almost like she represents the we would say digital nowadays, but she represents the pre-mechanical reproduction. And her focus on artifacts, her focus on original work is representative of the importance. And I think Proust really kind of elevates her to an important position early on in the novel, that she represents this kind of bridge between two moments in time.
Well, later on in the novel, I'm sorry to jump around, but there is this... I hate it when I heckle myself and then I completely lose my train of thought.
Focus, no more jumping points, but it's bad for your air back.
Right, but I think I've quoted, I think it's book 6, Time Regained. There's Bergot, the writer. He has this, he's on his deathbed and he gets out of bed to go to an art gallery because the painting, A View of Delft by Vermeer, has this little patch of yellow wall. And Bergot, the writer in the book, keeps saying a little patch of yellow wall. It's almost the final thing he says before he dies. And my own personal version of that, as I've said on my channel, I was in the Scottish National Gallery on a really miserable day in Edinburgh, which doesn't really narrow it down. There's about 350 days a year. But there's a Monet haystacks painting. I think it's called Snow Effect. And the sun is on this haystack, and the light off this painting hits you in the eyes. It's incredible. And you will never, ever, I have seen so many reproductions to make it relevant to this paragraph. And it doesn't, the reproductions, no matter how good, do not have a scintilla of the aura of being in front of that painting physically.
Yep.
And it was almost like being punched in the stomach. It was this feeling of the light coming off a haystack in the middle of winter. And you were there. It's absolutely incredible. And it reminded me, because you might ask yourself later on in the novel, if you ever get there, how could Bergot be so fixated on this little patch of yellow wall? But I'd be interested if other people have had this experience when you've seen a painting in person. And you're spoiled rotten because you're in the middle of Madrid. So the fact you don't spend every waking moment in the galleries there is a shame on you, Stuart.
It's a terrible shame, yeah. But I mean, I'm trying to think of some good examples. I mean, Garden of Earthly Delights, the first time we went to see that, I think I would just stayed in the room for about an hour, and there was wave after wave of tourist groups. I was just said there. There's something about his colors, and it's something about that period, that kind of Flemish Grandmaster period, where you cannot get those colors, you cannot reproduce them. You can buy a decent art book, you can buy a Taschen cheap art book, you can buy a Pantone accurate reproduction art book of the Garden of Earthly Delights, and the colors will never be the same as you actually being in that room with that painting. I mean, like the video you posted about Turner this week as well, when you see Turner in person, the light that off those photos, off those paintings, sorry, cannot compare to a photo. So I think the physicality of art as well, I think this is something Proust is getting at here as well, is that the fact that an artist had to mix that paint and mix that color, and it's been encapsulated in paint at a specific moment in time, is something completely different to an infinitely reproducible picture on a screen, a JPEG file or a reproduction t-shirt or whatever. It's never going to be the same.
Well, also, more than that, again, I'm sorry to go forward to the bit about the church, but when he's talking about the church, he's talking about the hangings in the church and the stained glass, and he talks about how the colours leach. And you're talking about the Hieronymus Bosch painting, Garden of Earthly Delights. I'm sure they used egg tempera, or they used techniques that they've lost the knowledge of how to do it now. And you've got that. They've used a particular technique that's aged over time. It's mellowed, it's blurred into other colours. These are all the things, and it's the way he describes throughout the book, Proust. It's interesting. I'm not a woo-woo person. Anyone who's watched my channel should know. So I'm not one who lends himself to Eastern mysticism, and I know nothing about Buddhism. I mean, I'm incredibly ignorant. But I was reading bits. This reminded me and then set me on to reading about the church. It's the way in which he writes about the wholeness, the oneness of life, art. When he experiences the church, it's him as a young boy. It's the cultural memory of all the people who've passed through that church. It's what the church means to the town and how you orientate yourself around the church wherever you are in the town. It's the flowers that reach over to the church. He just describes everything as a oneness. And this bit about photography, it's about that oneness is fragmented. That oneness is cut off in the mechanical reproduction of a photograph. I think that's what the grandmother is intuitively rejecting and reacting against. And I think grandparents have this, they're an interesting familial phenomena, grandparents, if I can put it that clumsy way, because you can be affectionate towards them without there's a separation. You can be affectionate towards them without the tension that people inevitably have with their parents. There's a bit of insulation, isn't there? Generational insulation, without making it sound like a hardware housing project.
And I think to add to that, some of the insulation comes from the fact that they're a lot older. They've passed through different phases of life, and I remember when I was growing up, my grandparents were retired. Well, my grandma never worked, but my granddad was retired, and they lived in a different time, I guess, to us. Obviously, my mum and dad working, they were super stressed, running around all the time. But my grandparents just were in the house. My granddad did stuff in the garage. My grandma did things in the garden. It was just like the typical British, grandma and granddad, like Nana and granddad. And there was a calming element to it. I think whenever you went round to the house, it was just this kind of spending time with people who were content with life and happy, but also had this exuding wisdom about life.
Can I push back on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, push back.
Because you slightly saccharine. You came from sounds like a very well balanced and normal, well adjusted family.
Meanwhile,
Meanwhile, back in Liverpool, I once went to a family funeral and an uncle. I'll share this and then we'll get in the text again.
Yeah,
a great uncle who very vague relation. I got chatting to him, and he said that my grandmother on my mother's side, who I knew, my father's parents both died before I was born, so I never knew them at all. But my grandmother on my mother's side was a truly misanthropic, nasty piece of work, and I knew her, and she was quite a bit. And he said that personality type always missed one generation in our family.
That's interesting.
And I said, "Oh, hello." Meet the latest manifestation. And I got chatting to him, and basically I inherited from her this absolute misanthropy and numerous personality problems that I can all put on her plate. Yeah. But anyway, you came from much happier, happy clappy, cuddly. So the fact you turned out the way you did is quite a indictment of you, isn't it?
I guess
I've battled genetics all my life.
Yeah,
you've been handed nice grandparents, and look what you did with it. Wasted it.
Yeah.
You're going to apologize to everyone.
I apologize, everyone. No, but yeah. Well, on my dad's side, because my dad was from Birkenhead. Well, he is from Birkenhead. He's still alive.
So plastic scouser.
He was a plastic scouser, yeah, but his side of the family is interesting.
All right, but anyway, we need to get on to this.
Anyway, swiftly moving on. Yeah.
I should. I don't think you should, because it's not a good thing. No. So I'm protecting you. I'll just say hello to Dolla's mum. She's in her rollers, got her slippers on, and she got up, albeit slightly late. Shame on you. Right. So the thing about the photograph. Yeah, it also reminded me. For those who aren't aware of him, I know some people on my channel really like I do, Jean Baudrillard. He did a book in 1968, I think was the French translation, called A System of Objects. And he describes how he uses the example of furniture, which I always found quite funny, but it's referenced here in this paragraph about the grandmother giving bad furniture, antique furniture. But he says in trendy Parisian flats in the 70s, or the 60s, you would have, it's called modular furniture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like kind of plugged together.
Yeah, you can plug it together and rearrange it in different formats.
It's like early IKEA thing, yeah. And it's usually always comes in the same like beige or brown color. But
Dolla's mum's just shared information that I do not want to know, so now I'm completely put off. But anyway, this furniture in Spain. Families pass on like old-fashioned oak furniture, and it goes through the generation, or they used to.
They still do. And if you go to the Pueblo, because usually in Spain, in the cities, everyone moved to the city, or most of the young people in the families moved to the city after the Civil War. So there was like about a decade of absolute poverty when Spain was like sub-Saharan African poor after the Civil War. And then when the economy started picking up, people moved to Madrid or Barcelona, Zaragoza, Valencia. So you tend to find people live in high density flats with newer furniture, more modern furniture, but then every family kept the Pueblo, the village house. And you go to some of these houses, really big old stone, like Castilian houses, and they've got furniture that's been handed down, from 200, 300. I mean, sometimes even 400-year-old tables, that have been just handed down from generation to generation.
And the point I'm making is that what you get from that is the marks of children. You know, you might on the wall frame have like little marks to keep track of how the children have grown up.
Yeah.
So there's like this archaeological trace of your family history.
Yeah.
And that's all the thing I think the grandmother here represents. Oh, I'd forgotten he mentions Turner. You can see at the bottom of that paragraph, given that I've just done a video on Turner.
There we go. Quick plug.
I might do a video on because you know this notion of the because you mentioned Chartres Cathedral, the whole notion of the church, because Monet did a huge number of paintings on cathedrals and churches. Might be a vaguely, well, it won't interest other people, but I'll be interested in doing a video on that, and that's the main thing that I enjoy it.
Self therapy, isn't it?
Self-indulgence of the highest disgraceful order. It shocks me that anyone's interested, to be honest. But anyway, right, come on, you say something about the text because I keep wittering on.
I'm just trying to think where we got to. I think what I like about this is he jumps around all the different countries. This is almost like if the church we get to later codifies the place where he grew up, the pictures that his grandma shared with him is like his first, I guess, like window into the world. So even though he's saying he comes from this very small town or village and everything's very quaint and I guess like compact, he's introduced to a bigger world. It's almost like he's introduced to art, he's introduced to travel without actually having to go there. I mean, nowadays, you know, families go on holiday, you know, you'll take a plane, you'll take a Ryanair anywhere in Europe, you can go. But obviously like European travel at this point in history was still reserved for, you know, more kind of affluent. Not to say that Proust wasn't affluent or came from a decent family, but I don't think he would be the type to do like, you know, the grand tour or things like that. So this was his like early introduction into a world outside of Combray.
And it's vaguely funny, isn't it? I think that the reference here, I'm not sure I can see it on the screen, but there's a bit where when he first goes to Venice, he doesn't recognize it because he's used to these really old-fashioned engravings that his grandmother's given him, which is the opposite of what you're talking about, is the modern phenomenon where we see Venice, but it's slightly disappointing. I remember reading, I don't know whether it's apocryphal, but the story was that the first people, the astronauts on the moon, actually when they first saw Earth from space, was slightly underwhelmed because they'd seen so many camera images of it. So yes, it was amazing, but not as much as they thought, because it wasn't the first time they'd seen it. And it's like anywhere you go nowadays, you'll have seen it before you get there. And that has a diminishing effect.
Well, he says it here, doesn't he? Yeah, but he basically says like he sees Venice from a picture from Titian, but it's a subjective view of Venice. Whereas nowadays we just get the objective view. We get the actual pixel by pixel, you know, 4K point of view shot of Venice. So when we go to Venice, we've already kind of formed an opinion of what Venice is. So it's like, I guess the aura of the subjective experience of Venice is removed from the absolute objectivity of mechanical reproduction.
Well, if I could just say two things about Venice that I remember. I stayed there for a month, and at the time I had an Italian. It was Paul's tour of Europe. I had different girlfriends from all across Europe. But I had an Italian girlfriend, and so we spent. She was from Udine, but we spent time in Venice a month there. And I really didn't like Venice because of the tourist aspect. But there was one morning we were on the ferry and we were approaching the waterfront, and the sun came out. It was in January, and the sun was hotter basically than, you know, Liverpool in June. But it was just stunning. It took your breath away. That was absolutely amazing. But I'm trying to remember the rough date, but it was basically mobile phones hadn't been out that long. And I remember we went past a building once we were on shore, and her phone beeped. And I said, "What's that?" And she was basically being messaged, you know, information about the building.
Oh, yeah.
And this was in the early days of that. That was a new thing. But what depressed me was you're in this incredibly auratic, this aura-infested place with the doges and all the art and just the atmosphere, you know, if you can ignore all these annoying tourists. All of that was, to me, ruined by the fact a piece of technology is telling you where to go next, what to buy. You know, it's, and there was one other third. I lied. There's three things. We were in the back streets where our flat was, and it was the days before B&B, so Airbnb. So we'd found a student who was renting his room out for a month, and there was a fruit seller in one of the back streets selling fruit. And my girlfriend said that she could only pick up about a third of the chat because they were using the Venetian dialect.
Right.
But so it was sad. The Venetian dialect was on its way out. But also this fruit seller, I doubt very much they're still there. Because, you know, the locals, there was this parallel world where the tourists and the locals had to live amongst it, and the locals were being driven out.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I think, is relevant to, I think this is the underlying story of some of what Proust is writing about.
Yeah. Yeah, time of great change.
Yeah, I like the phrase several thicknesses of art. She attempted by a subterfuge, if not to eliminate altogether, their commercial banality, which is what I've just been talking about in a different way, at least to minimize it, to substitute for the bulk of it what was art still, to introduce, as it might be, several thicknesses of art. Because that's the issue, isn't it? Your Korean bloke, I can never remember his name, Han. But he's all about the transparent society. Baudrillard talks about the transparency and simulation. Yeah. Technology makes society more and more transparent, more and more explicit. And the grandmother here is trying to introduce several thicknesses of art. So the very thing that you might criticize art for, it's not a perfect reproduction. It's got thicknesses in the way that stop you experiencing reality directly. Paradoxically, that's the thing, the medium through which artists communicate with you at a time, in a way that no technology can reproduce. And your mention of Hieronymus Bosch painting, even more primitive techniques at a much more primitive time can have an effect on you that's much more profound than the most advanced technology.
Yep. And that's the aura. I think if one were to define an aura, what Benjamin's talking about is that direct confrontation with, and the effect that you get. It's almost like a feeling of like this is something definitive of a moment in time, and you're almost kind of sharing that moment in time as you're enjoying the work.
Yeah, Dollar's mum's just said, isn't it always times of great change? And yes and no. I think I've mentioned this before, but the era Proust lived through, there are certain times at which, so when I do the next Turner video, I'm going to look at the Rain, Steam and Speed, I think it's called, the one about the train. And the Industrial Revolutions of the 1840s, mid-1840s, technological change has always been with us, but there are periods in history where it just exponentially, the pace of change increased. So I think there's Impressionist painters, it's what makes them so poignant. They're painting a France, the countryside, that had been roughly the same for hundreds of years and was just beginning to change. So a lot of the Impressionists painted country roads and country lanes that hadn't changed for hundreds of years. It's just horse transport. And all of a sudden, they were going to be completely demolished and taken over by, roads.
Yep.
So, yes and no, change has always been with us, but we are about to enter, God, I'm glad I'm not going to see the worst of it. The whole AI revolution. God knows what that's going to bring with it. But that is the pace at which technology is changing, I think, has measurably increased. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I was actually reading some stuff yesterday about like Mark Fisher, is it Nick Land? The accelerationists, and I mean, case in point would be look at the doubling of transistors in computer chips over the years. You can measurably put that on a timeline of technology and technological innovation and see how computer transistors went from, I think it was like 2 or 3 transistors per chip up to like billions, if not trillions now. Computer chips now on this kind of nanometer scale, which they measure the structure of the internals of the chip by, I think run to like 2 nanometer processes. So we've actually got to the stage now where the structures, the transistors are so small that through quantum effect, like the electrons in the chips can actually leak through the gates within the chips. So if you think of a tap, turning on a tap of water, the particles of water are so thin they can actually leak through the plastic pipes. And it's so profound how that's happened in a matter of decades, whereas previously technological advance would take hundreds of years, if not more. So yeah, we're in crazy times.
And yeah, I'm sorry again to people if you think this is irrelevant to the actual text, but I do think it's important background, because what Proust is writing about is that hinge point. His grandmother is the last generation of the things he's writing about, and he has the memory. And that word memory, one of the English translations is called In Remembrance of Things Past, which is my preferred title, actually. But all the way through in my notes in this section, I was writing things like cultural memory. All the churches, all the paintings he's mentioning, there is a continuity that's been broken that I do find quite poignant. And it's not just, it's the cultural memory of art, it's the cultural memory of buildings, it's the relationship that you have with those buildings. But it's also, I don't mean to get political, but the whole net zero thing that translates in the countryside to huge bloody big wind farms that completely destroy, talk about aura. The countryside is just destroyed with and I find it doubly ironic in Britain that they have solar farms. If there was a definition of a useless in Britain for the 4 days a year there is any sun. But these things about all the countryside I mentioned in the Impressionist paintings.
Yeah.
Combray, I know it's a fictional town based upon Ilya, I think it was. But Proust is describing this thing. Yeah, that is largely being either deliberately or inadvertently completely destroyed, ironically, with net zero in the name of conserving the planet. But at what cost, Anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about net zero. I mean, we will move on, viewers, in just a sec, but just to address that point, I think with net zero, you see the paradox there, that you need net zero for the insatiable need for power that is being driven by the insatiable need for growth, which is being by the technological will to power, so to speak. So we think we can fix the problems of global warming, which is being caused by technology. We can fix it by more technology. Instead of looking at saying, well, maybe we are accelerating too fast. What is it that's driving this need to make things and buy things and grow more things? And I think, I think Proust is really addressing, I mean, obviously not at that point in history, not in our current point, but he's addressing that point in time. What is being lost by technological advancement?
Yeah, and this isn't all theoretical stuff in the sense, on the most practical level. We discussed previously how many people, like, to say us reading this and the few followers we've got, it's pretty niche activity.
Yeah.
And, will your son in 10 years' time or whenever, 20 years' time, will he even have I'm not saying your son's thick. I know he's got to battle genetics on that one. But the fact, it's much, each generation that passes, it's going to be more difficult for them to read this, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, like, obviously, like, our family is quite academic. My wife works in a very academic sector, and we're very much no screen time, no computers, no mobile phones. Lots of books, lots of reading, and things like that. But it does feel like battling against the current, because everyone else in his class, kids 7, 8, 9 years old, getting mobile phones. Kids getting Nintendo Switch, computer games, and things like that. So obviously, he goes to school and he's surrounded by this. But I mean, there's hope. There's a bit of a pushback. I know in Madrid, the city council are really pushing for like a zero screen time thing in schools. So there's an awareness that, too much technology can be a bad thing, and there's a bit of a pushback. So
yeah, I'll never forget when this was years ago. I went to the National Gallery in London, the Sainsbury wing, I think it's called, to look at the medieval stuff. And there was a huge, as you go up the stairs, I don't know whether it's still there was a side door and a huge big bank of computers. And there was a school visit, and all the kids were on the computer being taught about the art.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it thinking, have I lost the plot? They're looking at screens.
Where the art's next to them in the other room, yeah.
100 yards away are some of the most fine, the finest art that humankind has ever produced. Yeah. And this is the mentality, this inability to see, this barrier that Proust's grandmother was really, intuitively aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm getting myself wound up
now. Here.
But then can you find the section where it talks about the grandmother would have thought it petty to concern herself too closely with the solidity of any piece of furniture? So she's giving, it's after the Titian.
Yeah, it's trying to
but she's giving this furniture out to people, and it's just not practical, and she doesn't see the point with that.
I think it's, that's it.
Yeah. So it's the solidity of any piece of furniture in which it could still be discerned a flourish, a smile, a fine conceit of the past, which is a beautiful phrase. But I like the way he then compares it. This is what I love about Proust. He brings in what are seemingly incommensurate, elements of life. So even what in such pieces answered a material need, since it did so in a manner to which we are no longer accustomed, was as charming to her as one of those old forms of speech in which we can still see traces of a metaphor whose fine point has been worn away by the rough usage of our modern tongue. I think that's a brilliant... But that's also what I was talking about, cultural memory. I'm talking about your son, and will he be able to... It's your point. It's not your son's fault. It's young people have been cut off by the culture they exist within. So I'll give you a daft example. When I did English literature at A-level, we did Chaucer, and it was in the original Middle English.
Yeah.
Old English, whatever it was. And it was a ball ache. But I still remember bits of The Merchant's Tale, which I studied, and I'm pretty bloody sure now if they study it at A-level, it's probably in translation, inverted commas. It'll be in modern English.
It'll be the graphic novel version or something like that, won't it? It wouldn't even be that, wouldn't even be translated.
But it's a wonderful thing to be able to have access. Shakespeare's probably the limit for most people now, but Chaucer in the original is amazing, funny.
Yeah.
There's a bit in The Merchant's Tale where his wife, he's blind, he's an old man who's married a much younger May-December marriage, and she's in a tree, a pear tree or something, with her lover. And she's basically, there's a whole dialogue going on. She's saying to him, no, we're just holding hands. And there's one line where he says, ye all gat in it went. He's basically saying, well, you're not holding hands. I've just bloody, that went in.
That's not old English. That's modern day Yorkshire.
Well, it's arboreal dogging, if I may put it that way. But Chaucer is describing the swinging almost literally in the trees. But there's this crudity, this, it's bawdy, it's rude. And this is another thing. It could actually be made really accessible because it is crude. It is funny.
It's relatable, exactly, yeah. It's very relatable still.
But the other thing about the metaphor, to give it a more modern reference, when I was doing the Turner, the last video I did, I didn't realise. I thought I had quite good command of the English language. I just assumed that Skyfall, the title of the Bond film, was an English word. And it doesn't actually exist, or it might now, post-Bond film.
Swedish. Or something, wasn't it? An anglicisation of Swedish.
And there's someone on the channel, I'm trying to remember their name, but there's someone on the channel, basically, because I thought I would go ski-fall. I thought that was quite accurate.
That's what was when you fall over skiing.
No, but there's actually a Swedish person on the site said that my pronunciation didn't even approximate. It wasn't even in the ballpark.
Skyfall.
No, I just thought I was reaching across the Nordic divide,
Yeah.
Trying to speak with a Swedish intonation. But I think it is. Someone saying, Jay saying, and it's true, anyone who saw the Muppets and the Swedish Chef, our minds have been polluted. We can't take Swedish intonation seriously.
Exactly. Yeah, you got that fake ABBA kind of Eurovision accent.
Do you remember the first time you saw the Swedish Chef? It's very funny. Hoity, 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 hoity.
Yeah, it would have been in the 80s sometimes as a kid, and it probably would have gone way over my head. I would have just been like, ha ha ha, that's a funny voice.
No, it's the way, it's his mannerisms, it's the way he cooks. Because obviously, I think it's the way the puppet is being manipulated. The person manipulating the Muppet doesn't have full control, so can't see what the chef's doing. So he's trying to make pancakes and they're going everywhere. It's very funny.
Oh man, puppets.
Yeah, it's all about the Swedish chef. That's the secret code to Proust.
Yep, absolutely.
Right, so we're moving down. Oh, that's the phrase as well. Further down that paragraph, the Gothic dovecot.
I was going to highlight that.
Yeah, no, you weren't. Or some other piece of antiquity. No, you're just trying to, piggyback on my choice of quote. Yeah, you're a quote squatter.
Quote scrounger.
You're a parasite.
Well, that was me at school playing football. I just used to stand by the goal. I had no idea about offside, and I never understood why my goals didn't count.
No, you're a pilot fish on the. I am the shark in the ocean. You're the pilot fish, feeding off the debris.
Eats the lice off your back. Yeah, what a grotesque image.
I've had a worse one off Dollar's mum this morning, so I can deal with that. Oh, but this beautiful phrase, Gothic dovecot, or some other such piece of antiquity that would have a favourable influence on the mind, filling it with a nostalgic longing for impossible journeys through the realms of time. I think that, in a way, is a summary of the whole 6 volumes.
Yep.
A nostalgic longing for impossible journeys through the realms of time. That's beautiful. I'm tearing up.
That should be on the back cover. There's the selling point. Proust in a world with Gothic dovecoats. Proust offers a impossible journey through the realms of time, and then he dies at the end. Some people get spanked, and a photo gets spat on. We've just spoilt the book, then, haven't we? We've given away the plot.
You are a Philistine of the highest order. I disassociate myself from you. Oh, channel gimp.
You'll forget about it by next week. I'll be invited back on.
It's one of the few advantages of working with a senile person.
Yep.
I've got no memory of when you offended me.
No, well, just so the viewers know, he always has to ask me which page we got up to at the start of every session. And I mean, sometimes I don't remember. I mean, it's like...
Look, Stuart, the fact I remember which book we're reading is a minor victory.
Oh, yeah, I did make that mistake once, turn up with the wrong book.
Right, so...
I think we're approaching the Madeleine, aren't we? I think we're...
Yes, we're getting...
There.
And by the time we approach, I hope that you'll be able to pronounce it properly. Madeleine. I'm guessing. My French pronunciation, I've been told, is awful. So Emma on my channel said it was atrocious. So my Swedish pronunciation and intonation's been insulted. My French intonation. You make fun of my English pronunciation.
Yeah, Scouse is a different language, though.
Well... yeah, there's an explicit statement where she talks about kindness and moral distinction that Mama had learned from my grandmother to place above all qualities in life. So I think it's quite clear that the grandmother is like the moral center of the whole, 6 volumes.
Yeah. Here we go. Kindness and moral distinction.
Yeah, and it was... Again, I remember reading an article ages ago about, because this is the section where the mother's reading to Marcel, the extent to which parents don't read with their kids anymore. It's such a natural, it's a profoundly psychological nurturing experience.
We find, though, that the parents that don't read to their kids, that they have a noticeable drop in performance at school. So out of all the parents in my son's class, we know the ones who read, we know the ones who read into books. And when you go to the library and the kids are reading lots, and grade wise, they're always at the top. And it kind of makes you feel a bit sad in a way. And I know you can't change other people's like families, and you can only encourage and you can only suggest, but it does make me feel sad that like a lot of families don't read to their kids.
So am I correct in saying you were never read to as a kid?
No, I was read to a lot. I mean, I had a huge book collection as a kid. I was reading all sorts of weird stuff, and it's kind of evidenced in school. And I think it's the single most thing. If any parents watch, I think the single most important thing that you can do is read to your kids when they're young.
I would have just liked not to have been beaten within an inch of my life for being constantly naughty. But, you know, you were read to, you spoiled little git.
Yeah, I got a nice book collection.
Luxury,
man. I think my dad used to come home and he'd buy me like a book every week. And then in the school library, I had a really good school in my primary school. There was a good library in my primary school, and it was like you were allowed to take books home whenever you wanted, any day. So I used to just blast through all these great reads. I used to love like fantasy books. I read like The Hobbit when I was about like 7 or 8 years old. Just absolutely loved it.
No, you are actually emotionally triggering me, because I told this on another video I did once. When I've got this really traumatic memory.
Yeah.
It was when my mum and dad didn't have that much money, and I was in infant school, and they had a book club, you know, so pre-internet. They'd have these deliveries, and I can remember the smell of the books was gorgeous. So kids would order books through their parents, and they'd be delivered at the school. And I never had one.
Wasn't it? I think the company was called Scholastic. Yeah, I remember. We had that.
And this kid had this book that had a picture of an Indian lying on the ground, listening for things coming in the distance, and that's what I knew it was. And he said the Indian was dead. And I was so angry.
Shot by a cowboy.
But I wasn't able to have one of these books. I was angry about that. I was angry that this kid was so thick. So there was a double anger, because the kid was thick, yet they could have a book I couldn't. Yeah. So I just started shouting at him, "You're thick."
Oh, the injustice.
Thick. Yeah. No, and I got really into a lot of trouble at school. So that explains some of my early, you know, backward development.
Heckling traits. You learn to heckle at a young age, a tender age.
Right, so then I think we've got to the bit, it's the new paragraph all about, and so it was that for a long time afterward when I lay awake, there's a whole section here on memory.
Yeah.
This is where you start singing. God, we're actually making progress.
I know, it feels good.
Slow, but steady.
Slow but steady. I keep thinking we've done more sessions, but we've only done 5 sessions, haven't we?
So we're over 10 pages a session.
That's
like warp speed, isn't it?
Yeah, but imagine if we did like that, the Emile Choran. If we went through that whole book, it would be in like every single video would be one aphorism, and we'd still need to go into like 2 or 3 sessions for some of the aphorisms. How long would that take?
Yeah, well, the Choran just basically ends up you and me insulting each other through Choran's language.
The voice.
It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. I did buy that one. What's the Mainlander, Philip Mainlander. We'll have to get into that at some point in the distant future.
I've got that as well. Yeah, I haven't opened it yet.
You sent me the PDF, and I managed to get a copy here in Spain for quite cheap. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's good.
So our Mislit series will continue.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Like as we talked about, it has a purifying and positive aspect to it. You just think, oh, like at least my life isn't as bad as these miserable sods, if anything.
Well, also it's like on a slightly, because he's not as well. He is sometimes quite depressing, our Proust, in the sense it's quite elegiac and it's quite
melancholic. Yeah, there's this element of melancholia.
Well, there is, because this section's all about memories, so segueing neatly in a way that you never manage to, because you're always trying to distract us. There is this bit about the way in which, to what extent is nostalgia simultaneously sad and enjoyable? I've always been intrigued by the emotion of nostalgia.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite bands, it's a Scottish electronic band called Boards of Canada. And their whole like shtick is nostalgia, kind of like this nostalgia for like 1970s, 1980s, like kind of analog feel. So they use all kind of old samples from tapes and use old synthesizers and things like that. And it's all about being young. It's all about childhood and their music, and it's kind of very poignant and sad, almost like depressing music, but then it has this kind of joyous like undertone to it as well. And I think like acoustically and sonically that really captures the kind of feeling that I get when I'm reading Proust.
Well, this specific section here, to narrow it down to the text, is why I asked was, it's an open question, but it's the way in which he describes his memories. It goes back to our previous discussion about aura. He talks about, it's a beautifully described thing. I saw no more of it than this sort of luminous panel, sharply defined against a vague and shadowy background, like the panels that are Bengal light. I think it's like Bengal light, according to my notes. Bengal fire or light is a type of firework that burns with a brilliant and sustained blue light, formerly used for signaling. Yep. So he's describing this sudden flash of light that illuminates, or some electric sign will illuminate and dissect from the front of a building the other parts which remain plunged in darkness.
Yep.
And so there's the visual aspect there that he's describing, but I also think what Proust does more than any other author is he combines the visual with the olfactory, the smell, and the sense of touch. He combines all the senses to express this concept of nostalgia. And psychologically, I'm just curious, because you don't have to be a qualified psychoanalyst to realize that dwelling in the past can be, I was going to say dwelling in the past can be psychologically unhealthy. But if Proust hadn't dwelt in the past so pathologically much, you wouldn't have his masterpiece.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of looking back in the past. Regret is, I would suggest, is one of, if I had my time again, I think I'd just spend more time not doing things that could potentially cause regret in future. because regret is a horrible thing that you don't realize until 10, 20, 30 years later, and then it's too late. So it is weird, and it's one of those, it's the eternal dilemma of being a human being. How can you preemptively know what you're going to regret?
Well, I mean, as you know, I have more than a passing interest in Eastern philosophy, and obviously in Buddhism, Taoism, Zen Buddhism, things like that, is like the past is not a good thing because of this exact reason. But I would counter argue, and probably you would agree, that you don't get these fantastic earth-shattering works of art and literature and poetry without that interaction with the past. Because I think melancholy and regret is such a powerful spark for creativity.
Yeah, and I think because we're going to talk about Schopenhauer, that's going to be the video that gets us taken off YouTube. But the way in which I think his idea of aesthetics is aesthetics, art, literature, they allow you to temporarily reflect upon existence rather than being swamped by it. So you can detach yourself momentarily from the inevitable pain that life is. Yeah,
and essentially what he's prescribing is a 19th century Western European way of dealing with what Eastern Asian scholars are basically talking about. It's the same issue. This, the pain of being alive, the realization that the universe isn't fair, and it can be a pretty rough place. And it's like, how do you psychologically insulate yourself from that? And obviously Schopenhauer is through art and the creative process. It's a way of regaining agency from this kind of like deluge of the will to power.
Do you think in like 50, 100 years time, someone will find a remnant of one of these videos and I will become the new Schopenhauer for saying, life's not fair?
Well, the interesting thing about this is, I mean, if there was ever some sort of like global nuclear war, like all this would be wiped out. It would be gone in a second. And that's one thing about the physicality of books and art and paintings. It's probably more likely to have those Turner paintings exist in 100 years' time than these videos.
Well, no, I think we'd live on in the memories of people who've been bored senseless by us week after week, never progressing in Proust.
The ones who weren't fried by the radiation.
Yeah. There'd be like,
One would hope.
7-fingered people just saying, I remember Paul and Stuart.
Do you remember those chats about Proust? Yeah, no, but that'd be nice to think about. That's a very optimistic way of looking at this series, isn't it? Overly optimistic, I would argue, but hey, it's a sunny day. I'll give you that. That's about as optimistic as you get, to be honest. I think that's the peak optimism, Paul optimism.
Retrospectively reminiscing about a future nuclear holocaust. Yeah, that's about it.
So, yeah, I'm going to start calling you Optimus Paul.
Optimus Imbecilicus Paulus.
Optimus Gimp and Optimus Paul.
Where are we? Yeah, I like the bit where he talks about his memories, like concertina down into such specific. So the hall through which I would journey to the first steps of that staircase, so cruel to climb, which constituted all by itself, the very narrow trunk of an irregular pyramid, and at the summit, my bedroom, with the little hall through whose door with glass panels Mamma would enter. And I just like the way it goes on, in a word seen always at the same evening hour. So it's the specificity and selective nature of memory, isolated from all its possible surroundings, detached and solitary against its shadowy background, the bare minimum of scenery necessary. And I like this bit, like the scene location one sees printed at the top of the title page of an old play for its performance in the provinces. So it's like, it's memories of memory. It's layers of memory, because it's his.
It's the pyramid, yeah.
Yeah, it's his image in his head, and then he makes the reference to the representation of that image on a piece of paper, which has on the piece of paper a simplified representation of the thing that's in his head. It's layer upon layer upon layer of memory.
It's actually triggered me a little bit, this talking out there, that the bedroom seems to be the top of the pyramid. I just started to think now about being younger, and the amount of time that you spend in your bedroom reading or playing on the computer and stuff like that. Hundreds, thousands of hours in your days, weeks, months of your life.
Or in your case, random, rampant onanism, yes, like Proust himself.
Exactly, yeah. But you just think of like all that time, but you can't really remember it that well. You only remember like brief moments. I couldn't really describe to you what my bedroom was like as a child, as a teenager. Yet you spent so much time in it. Whereas Proust, he can very visually describe, and it's obviously very important to him. He can describe, all the things were inside it, the magic lantern and things like that. But
no, I could give because I had a dartboard, so I had a whale of a time, and I remember very specifically. But I had like endless paper rounds, so I just remember my bedroom very specifically, because sleep was so precious, because I was always getting up at the crack of bloody dawn.
Oh, you had the morning round, so I had the afternoon round.
I had a morning and afternoon, and this is luxury. I also did a Sunday when the papers are really, really heavy.
Oh, Sunday Times, always like 20 inserts. Oh.
No, if my parents were still alive, I could probably sue them for child cruelty. And you've triggered me now.
Talking about paper. Well, you triggered me talking about paper rounds. Oh man. Yeah. Are they even legal nowadays? Are kids even allowed to do them?
But do papers exist? Actual physical papers is the other issue.
Yeah, that's a good counter question.
Yeah, I doubt very much. Why would you need to deliver papers when they're out of date by the time they've gone through the letterbox? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Pregnant silence as we contemplate the futility of our existence. And
I'm just imagining those paper rounds on a cold, freezing cold winter afternoons with snow, and you'd be on your bike, and you'd be. I had to do all the big houses, so the houses were about 10 minutes walk apart on like the posh road in my town.
Well, now imagine it's like morbidly obese children on mobility scooters trying to do paper rounds.
Yeah, or those electric scooters called? Those ones that all kids seem to have nowadays.
Yeah, but the kids now are too large to actually use those, so it's back to mobility scooters. Because it's like I've always been intrigued in North America. Maybe this doesn't travel because North Americans don't realize in Britain you actually had to put the newspapers through the letterbox.
Yeah.
Because North America, they just lob them onto the front lawn, and that's treated.
Put them in the post box.
That's a typical North American lack of attention to detail. Old-fashioned Europe, we insisted that they went through the letterbox.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because in North America people wouldn't steal off the front lawn the newspaper, as in the UK they would.
They would too, yeah. But do you remember trying to push those Sunday Times through the letterbox? My God, and it would get torn on the way in, and you get Mr. Jones. You bastard!
You're triggering me now with quite obscene memories. So let's move on quickly.
Exactly. Oh, my poor brother had to deliver 20 of those on his Sunday morning round. 20 Sunday Times. But it was about this wide, the bag, and his poor little 12-year-old lad, It's like something from Victorian times. From he'd get paid like £6 a week. Oh man, couldn't even buy a bag of sweets for £6 nowadays.
Proust through the medium of Stuart's triggered.
I am triggered now. Oh man, I need therapy. Anyway,
right. Well, we're very rapidly approaching.
We're approaching the Madeleines, but I think we briefly touched on this a few videos back, didn't we? About the Celtic belief, souls of animals.
Yeah.
Do you want to just remind our lovely viewers what's
not really? No.
Okay. But you banged on about it for about half an hour in a couple of videos back.
I think I bored myself. I don't have to tell people more.
Swiftly moving on then.
Yeah, just let's get stuck into the. How do you mispronounce it? The Madeleine.
Madeleine, like the girl's name. It's not Madeleine, is it?
I would have thought it's Madeleine.
I'm gonna check now.
Some Francophile will tell us we're both doing it massively wrong anyway.
I think we lost the Francophiles about 5 minutes into video 1.
Sacre bleu, mon Dieu. Zut alors.
Zut alors.
Eux est les subscribers français.
dans les subscribers.
Les subscribers est dans l'arbre.
Oui, see. Here we go. I'm gonna listen to it. Madeleine. That's
Madeleine.
Madeleine. Yep.
So we've both been mispronouncing it.
We've both been wrong, yeah. We both failed A-level French.
It's only episode 5.
The most famous scene in the book, and we've been mispronouncing it for 5 episodes. Oh man.
So say it again.
Madeleine.
Should we just keep saying it for the next hour? Well, 25 minutes.
Tasse de thé, Madeleine. Tasse de thé.
Yeah, très bon.
Où est les Madeleine?
You know, the French government, they're quite arsey about the way the French language is protected.
Oh, yeah, very proud country with language. Yeah,
we risk being, kidnapped and taken to Calais.
Yeah, well, you risk getting a strike against your channel by the French Institute for Language, don't you? Who is this Paul? Find me this Paul. Bring him to me. Zut alors, the bastard, English bastard. Can you imagine Sarkozy with his sunglasses? I mean, Macron means business with those sunglasses, Paul. I mean, he's going to come for you.
Well, I'd be able to distract Macron by just finding a 90-year-old woman in a miniskirt and
throw it in his direction while you make
that would
escape.
Distract him away from the matter at hand. Weird marrying your mother.
Interesting relationship. But I mean that's the French amour, as they say. Ugh. Okay, here we go. Let's get into it, as they say on YouTube. Madeleine.
Are you sure it's Madeleine?
Madeleine. That's what Google Translate said.
Oh, that famous French pronouncer.
That famous pronouncer. Can I share the screen?
Pronuncer is how Google Translate would pronounce it.
Yeah. I'll go on Wikipedia. Can you do the phonetic alphabet? I'll post it. Can I post it in the comments?
There's a French, on YouTube. There's a guy who does all these pronunciations. I've forgotten his name, but he's very funny. It's like he's got like a Pepe Le Pew French accent, and he does all these difficult to pronounce words in many languages. But I'm sure he does that as well.
Yeah, there's a good website for English. It's called How Jay Say, or how do you say, but it's spelled How Jay Say, and it's a guy who's read every single word in the Oxford Dictionary and recorded it. So a really fantastic website for English. So there must be a French version of that. How do you say? Okay, do you want to get started then, Paul?
I was just letting you just witter on.
Let's kill some time.
Right, where are we?
Do you know? Question. Sorry to jump in with a inane banter. Do you know why these cakes are shaped like a shell and where they come from? What's the significance?
They're pilgrims, so it's on the pilgrimage.
Like the Camino. Yeah, I get you.
El Camino de Santiago de Compostela. The what you call it, for people who didn't know, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, it's always been the symbol of the pilgrims is the scallop shell. And one of the theories is that it was the way they got the nightly measure of food. They'd use the scallop shell. And I think biblically, the scallop shell's in the Bible in various representations of the Bible in Western art. So there's various reasons, but the scallop shell, is it Saint-Jacques? It's known as. Yeah, it'll be somewhere in my notes. But whereas, so it is with our past. So this idea that the soul is found in the tree, the Celtic belief. And so it is with our own past. It is a labour in vain to attempt to recapture it. All the efforts of our intellect must prove futile. The past is hidden somewhere outside the realm, beyond the reach of intellect, in some material object, in the sensation which that material object will give us, which we do not suspect. And as for that object, it depends on chance whether we come upon it or not before we ourselves must die. So it's the arbitrary, and I think this is his difference of opinion between Proust and Bergson, his brother-in-law, the idea that to what extent can you control your memory? I just think from personal experience, of course you can control some conscious memory, but the number of, maybe this is more about my psychological condition, the number of, on an average day, the number of intrusive thoughts that aren't, they're just spontaneous. You don't know where they came from.
Yeah.
Mother? And so there is definitely a large element of your memory and your recall and your recollection that are nothing to do with your conscious self.
No, I totally agree. Well, there's techniques you can do, and I mean, there's this whole, I guess, like interest groups about learning techniques to be able to like kind of get inside your memory to actually kind of find hidden things. And it's not just. I think there was a period. So, and in the 90s when you had that whole hypnosis thing, and there was all TV programs about hypnosis and regressing, not like kind of past life like bollocks, but actually using hypnosis to try to remember things that happened in your own past. I think
it's caused loads of scandals because it's what was it called? Regressive memory therapy or something along those lines.
That's it.
And there are loads of false accusations of sex scandals and stuff in the past.
Yeah, there was a lot of court cases where they tried to use it as evidence and things like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very weird. But I mean, there are memory techniques to kind of get inside your head and remember things that have happened in the past. But then obviously you need to question yourself, how authentic are these memories? As you've talked in previous videos about how memories are formed.
Well, I think that's an absolutely crucial aspect of Proust, because that section where he's describing how specific his memory was, he refers to visually the narrowness of the corridor, the thing we've just quoted.
Yeah.
And he's actually saying, he himself is saying, he has personal recollection that the overall house was much more detailed than his specific memory. So he's admitting he was there at the time and his memory is incredibly partial because that's how memory works. Your mind focuses upon and privileges certain aspects of an overall experience, and you have to do that. It's one of the themes in Jorge Luis Borges's work.
Yeah,
This idea that you can't remember everything, and there can't be a word for everything. You have to select down in order to have human experience.
Yeah. But just to add an extra layer of ambiguity on top of that, just how our especially how our visual cortex works. It's something I read recently from a scientific journal, is that the way our vision works, especially peripheral vision, our brain creates shapes and images to fill the peripheral vision that a lot of the time don't actually exist. It's almost like we predict what should be there. So, for example, now I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking at your face, but I know there's a bookshelf to my right, and my peripheral vision is filling that information in, even though I can't actually see it. But then if I turn around and look at the bookshelf actually looks slightly different to how it was previously in my peripheral vision. So the brain has created it.
Well, I've done a little bit of work on Daniel Dennett, on the neuroscientist stroke philosopher, but he describes it in one of his essays. It's something to do with, and forgive me, anyone from a biology background, but there are color cones in the back of your eye.
Yeah.
And there aren't enough. So what you're describing is that the color cones don't go to the edge of the back of your eye. So your eye and brain in combination have to fill in the gaps. Otherwise, you'd only have partial vision.
Yep, that's right.
So that's what you're describing. It's the biological need to fill in the gaps that are biological color cones in the back of the eye fail, So it's a biological gap that we fill in. And that's one of his points, this idea that
it translates to memory as well.
Well, it's an argument against people that believe, and I've argued against them in various talks, that believe that science can be some type of approximation for an absolute description of the world. And it's just not, in terms of human experience, what you've just said indicates that human experience in its most basic biological nature is incomplete and involves partial reconstruction through our brains and imagination. So the idea that science can provide some answer in some abstract way, it can describe the universe, but it can't ever hope to describe it in a truly human way.
The totality,
because human existence by definition is incomplete. That's ironically what makes it human. So I've always been puzzled by people who are obsessed by the scientific way. I've always said this, science is obviously important for controlling things and predicting things in a causal, mechanical, natural way. But so what? When I say so what, that's obviously important for huge swathes of life. But then there are other still significant swathes of life in which that type of thinking just isn't relevant.
That's exactly,
So what science has to say about Proust is minimalistic in the extreme. It's, Proust is the antidote to science. He's or the complement or the supplement, however you want to describe it.
Well, he provides phenomenological evidence that can point to certain theories, but then a lot of certain theories, especially with regard to memory and subjectivity, science can approximate, but there are so many holes and gaps because there's so many things that cannot really necessarily be described in the language of science, and that's the problem. And good science understands that. But I think what you're alluding to is the type of science that says we can explain everything through science.
Yeah, but even Daniel Dennett, it's interesting. Part of Daniel Dennett, I think it was Dennett, apologies if I've misremembered, but one of the neuroscientists I was reading, I'm pretty sure it was Dennett, was describing...
I think it was Dennett.
Well, one of his... he does various experiments that involves people describing what they're perceiving. And that interested me because he's taking the description too much at face value. I think implicit in Proust, everything we've read today implies that even to the person most directly affected, their subjective impression of their own subjective experience is questionable. And they will, throughout the whole 6 volumes, Proust questions himself.
Yeah, Proust is aware of this, whereas a scientist would try to look for some normative description, so something concrete. Whereas I think Proust, right from the get-go, is saying that this cannot be concretized, this cannot be reified.
Yeah, but my point was Daniel Dennett is one of the more reflexive, one of the more subtle neuroscientists,
he gets it, yeah.
And even he falls into this trap of thinking that you can quantify and use experimental methods to describe something that is beyond the experimental. Yep. And in terms of, you've used the phrase phenomenological. I can't even say now. Phenomenological.
Phenomenological, yes.
That's one of those words. Nobody, I can say it, and then the minute you think, well, that's going to be a difficult word to pronounce, you start stumbling over it. But the phenomenological aspect of Proust, the beauty of it, the skill of it, it's so realistic because it's unashamedly artistic.
Yeah.
He's not trying to give a reproducible scientific account of what it is to experience life. He's realized that the most accurate you can actually do is to represent memory in all its gaps and omissions, which actually are what we then seek to fill. And that actually is what makes memory the human phenomenon that it actually is.
Would you say Proust is trying to reproduce the phenomenon as best he can, as opposed to trying to explain and codify the phenomenon? Then he gives you the phenomenon and says you work out yourself.
No, I think he absolutely encapsulates. So I'm sorry to keep referring to this shortly after the Madeleine. I'm going to mispronounce it again. The Madeleine.
Madeleine.
The Madeleine. That episode, we get to the church in Combray. And what I find fascinating about Proust is he describes as a writer, he brings in, so he starts talking about how the plants interact with the church, how the church interacts with people's perceptions of it, how the church interacts with the town. And he uses as his metaphors and similes, he uses various methods that bring in, I've mentioned it before, incommensurate elements of life. And he brings them in to express himself. And on the one hand, that is an artistic way. He's a writer. He's using writing techniques. On the other hand, he's using his imagination. And all the things we've just been speaking about at the most cognitive, granular level, the human brain uses its imagination to fill in gaps. So he's using the artificial skill of a writer that actually, when you think about it, is a very close mirroring replication of what the brain itself does at a granular level.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, as a writer, it's overtly artistic. But on the other hand, like I was saying about Monet and the haystacks in winter, the art, it's through its artifice, it's through its artificiality, paradoxically, that it approaches the essence of reality. And this is... you and I could go on for hours about Heidegger and the concept of the essence of truth.
Yep.
And in the last video I did on Turner, I linked it to Plato. Heidegger argued to some extent Western philosophy went wrong with Plato because Plato created this tendency to abstracting from everything. Whereas the pre-Socratic philosophers, Heraclitus and people, and Proust in this instance, they're immersing us in the here and now. They're immersing us in trying to describe what reality really is in its essence.
I think to link to Heidegger as well, that they're really describing, or Proust is really describing, the process and the flow as something that's organic, developing. Whereas I think, from Plato onwards, Heidegger argues that everything is codified and solidified, and we actually miss the process by which things become.
Yeah, at the most basic level, I did well at school in physics, but I always struggled mentally with the idea that, so for example, can you ever remember when you did physics at school, they do an electric circuit diagram to teach you about how electric works. And then
you have to draw the symbols for all the components and things like that.
And then you go into the physics lab and there'd be these hardboard circuit units, the most basic things with a little light bulb in the corner to show you how the circuits work.
Yep.
Now, I was very comfortable with it in English literature, with the idea that these are people using abstract descriptions to describe the real world, and they use words and they use mental images and they use imagination, and it's not realistic. But on the other hand, they're describing the essence of existence. Whereas with physics, they're describing the essence of electricity. They're trying to get you to understand it, which I did. But the disparity between the mental schematic representation in the diagram and the actual physical embodiment of electricity, the gap was so big that I really struggled. For some reason, I didn't respond intellectually to that at all.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And I think when you get older and you start reading about, or at least me personally, I started reading about the actual fundamental nature of electricity and how it works, and then especially down to the quantum level. It's so profoundly interesting. And I'm just like, I wish my science teachers had taught me the whole picture instead of just showing me like a little diagram. I'll push this button to see, close the circuit and see the light bulb. So well, that's pretty boring. If they talked about electrons and subatomic particles and stuff like that would have just blown my mind and probably got me more interested in physics as a kid.
Well, like with religion, I've always think the older I've gotten, the more I've looked into the Bible and its narrative techniques and the complexity of its references and imagery. Yeah. You could actually, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I think religion and school has lost the plot because they should teach it as a form of literature.
Absolutely.
And that would be a gateway for lots of people who aren't necessarily religious to at least appreciate the complexity of religion, as opposed to trying to batter people over the head emotionally. This is why you need to believe in religion.
But you would have studied religion. I mean, I studied religion at high school, at secondary school. So
but it was taught so badly.
Yeah, I remember it was getting to the stage of that point where diversity was kind of creeping in. So it wasn't really taught about the stories or the fundamentals of each religion. It was basically taught about plurality and everyone's the same and every religion's the same, respect religion. I wanted to know the actual stories. I wanted to know the stories of all the the battles in the Old Testament, or the Buddhism and things like that. Nature of reality. That was what I wanted to know about. But it was just learn about a Buddhist temple. Paint a picture of a Buddhist temple. It's like, well, tell me about Buddhism. I don't want to paint a picture. I can do that in art.
Actually, another personal confession. One of my proudest moments as a precocious, twatty 17-year-old was I made a priest cry. Which isn't normally how it works. It's supposed to be the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say.
No, we had this scheme in our sixth form where you had to go and do, you had the choice. You could go and do apostolic work, I think they called it. You went out and helped people. It was supervised. Yeah. You go and paint some old lady's house or whatever. Or you could swim with disabled people. And I had to go to a university interview, so I didn't get to choose. So I was given, I wanted to do the swimming. It's like some weird form of swimming with dolphins.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's definitely a badly thought out work experience, isn't it?
So anyways, but I had to go and paint some old woman's bedroom door or something stupid. And a little scroty grandson turned up to see what type of a job we were doing. Oh, no. So I then said, "Why aren't you doing it? She's your grandmother." So I had to leave. I got asked to leave the house. And then to make matters worse, it was then discussed in an RE, a religious education class. And I said, no one ever forced the apostles to follow Christ. So this is a completely bogus exercise, and I object. And I got into this really intense discussion, and this priest just lost the plot.
Oh, man.
That was fond memories of school.
Yeah. I was going to say, did they call a priest on you in class? Excuse me, Mr. Turner. We need the priest in class 7B now. Paul's having a demonic moment again. Yes, he's frothing at the mouth. Yes, it is urgent.
With regards to the electricity, though, I just think, again, it's like religion. There's a lack of imagination as to how to teach these things. Yeah. But they could have got the worst behaved kids like me and got tasered them to show the effects of electricity. There are various methods that I just think teachers radically underutilize.
We had a great science teacher. He was called Mr. Tickle. like Mr. Tickle, like the Mr. Man. It's spelled exactly the same way.
Are you sure this isn't part of your regressive therapy? Your recovered memory syndrome.
He's talking about. Yeah, he
he's told you his name was Mr. Tickle, but was it really?
But he had a really great Middlesbrough accent. He was just proper salt of the earth, down to earth person, and he knew how to get the bad kids into science because he would just blow stuff up. He would bring in lithium and say, "Oh, I'm going to put this lithium in some water." Boom, glass all over the classroom. And the bad kids loved it. They got so into it because it was something they could relate to. Destruction. Oh wow, this guy's cool. And I think teachers like that are sorely missing nowadays. The ones who slightly break the rules a little bit. But,
right. Yeah. I think before I make any more personal, embarrassing confessions that will get me into trouble, when are you available again to carry on with this?
Probably in 2 weeks, I think. So we could set up for Thursday, just to get the diary. Thursday 2nd.
Right. So let's do that.
Yep.
So 2 weeks today, we will carry on.
We could probably do the whole session on the madeleine. Madeleine. We could probably do it. Yeah, because we are there at the Madeleine.
It's going to annoy the hell out of me because I know it. I've mispronounced it for so long. There's no way on earth I'm going to learn to pronounce it properly again.
Yeah, we need a French collaborator to help out with this, don't we?
Or could you develop a voiceover that you could play on your microphone every time we have to say it?
Some sort of AI generated pronunciator.
Well, no, real French person saying it, and you play it every time we need to say it. That would be
like a soundboard, like you click on the word on the screen. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, because that would A, it would be funny, but B, it would also, it's going to bug me because I'm borderline OCD about these things. Yeah,
no, we should do it.
Right, so 2 weeks time, and then when are we doing the Schopenhauer? It's
next Friday, 9 o'clock, isn't it? 8 or 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock for me, 8 o'clock for
no.
For you guys.
Don't confuse people. It's 7 o'clock UK time. It'll be 8 o'clock for you. I'm pretty sure.
Maybe you're right. I trust you. So, there might not be a video on the 2nd of April if we get banned.
Well, I think you secretly want that.
No, well, it'd be good for the clicks.
No, so we're doing Schopenhauer in a week's time, next Friday, and the essay is, if you can check it out online if you want to read it in advance. We're going to try and have a vaguely serious discussion. To be gender compliant and truly diverse, we've chosen 3 white blokes who are going to discuss the essay on women.
Yeah, sure. A.K.A. Schopenhauer's letter to his mum.
Well, it is strange because the whole topicality of incel culture and Schopenhauer, as much as you could describe him, he was an incel ahead of his time, is a way to describe how he wrote the essay.
Yep.
And on the one, I don't know what you think, just very quickly, Stuart, because on the one hand, it probably is. I'm trying to get my head around, should you really have a woman to discuss it? And part of me rejects the tokenism of that, and the other part of me also thinks it's not really about women, the essay. I think the angle I think we'll probably take on it is that it's more about his psychology and the psychology of misogynistic men. And I'm not sure, this will be me mansplaining, but I'm not sure how much women can say about the psychology of men regarding women, because they're on the receiving end, they're not the ones thinking it.
Yeah, and there's not really anyone on the receiving end of the essay, is it? It's more like his deep dark thoughts to himself. It's almost like him trying to, like you say, psychologically go through things himself. So we'll see what we make of it. I mean, doing some background reading on him, it's quite interesting. I didn't realize he had 2 illegitimate children, who I think they both died within a year. So I think it was one with a maid and one with a sculptress. Like an artist that he was having an affair with. I have it written down in my notes, but it does seem to suggest that he had quite some bad experiences with families and having children.
Well, we're going to have James Cox, and Stuart told me that James actually is married to a ladyboy, so he'll have an interesting perspective also. So it should be quite an interesting 3-way talk.
Yeah.
I'll now get off this and be dealing with James's lawyers.
Yeah. I can hear the phone ring.
Right, everybody.
We best go and speak to James.
Yeah, we're going to now apologise to James and try and get him to still come on. So thank you very much for your attention.
Might just be us two. Yep.
We'll see you in a fortnight's time. All the best. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.